Isn't this a great facility, a great location? Yeah.
Yes.
And Aaron at the bar is actually the owner of the Story Parlor. So if you really want to be nice to the Story Parlor, buy a few drinks.
No problem.
Okay.
So I'm first.
I am Chuck Fink. I am your host tonight. And you're in store for some really fun stories by some really cool and great storytellers. So, how many are here to hear me talk a lot? Oh, Wendy, are you going to get it Monday? Yeah, I have all the intros here. There we go. Our first teller is Joe Mangum. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. She was a real estate executive. She was a trainer, a coach, and she developed strategies in real estate that resulted in thousands of real estate professionals growing their business worldwide. Okay. Let's hear it. Yeah. Joe is here tonight because she was foolish enough to take my storytelling class at Holly, and she shined like a star. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome to the stage, soon to be your friend, and now mine, Joe Mangum.
You know, we have a slogan here in Asheville, right? Where weird is normal. Now, I have got lots and lots of examples of this. Let's start with the sister bad habit. Hairy legs, beard, runs around Asheville in a nun outfit. Or we can talk about the folks at our finest restaurants in town, dining in their pajamas. Or, of course, there's the very polite bears who allow the police to escort them out of town. That and many more examples. That is every day in Asheville. You know, I think about Asheville as a lovely old Southern woman who smells like patchouli. And let's be honest, she's probably a little bit drunk. But she still manages to welcome everyone into her arms. That's her charm. But then on September 27th, 2024, I just heard somebody go, shoo, the unimaginable happened. Hurricane Helene came to Western North Carolina and dumped an estimated 40 billion, that's billion gallons of water onto a funnel, better known as the Appalachian Mountains. And life changed. In my little corner of the world, my husband Tom and our dog Violet were huddled together, listening to trees crash, car alarms, and the constant sound of sirens. When we finally came out onto the street to look at all the destruction, we found neighbors standing there looking around like, what's going on? And we started taking inventory. Okay, water? No. Power? No. Cell service? No. How about wireless? No. Any way to get out? No. Okay. But what we did have was community. And so later that night, a group of neighbors came onto our porch with candles and wine. And we sat there and we drank and we talked about our concerns. We talked about our fears. We talked about our worries. We talked about what was going to happen. And we talked about what was happening out there. And then suddenly, our lights came on. And everybody on the porch went, oh, we have power! Until everybody realized, no, they didn't have power. I had power. It was a buzzkill. out of this crazy guilt, I started saying, wait, no, it's not going to last. It's not going to stay on. But I was wrong. The next morning, I found one of my neighbors on my porch. I call her Purple Jody. And Purple Jody, because she has purple fingernails, purple glasses, purple clothes, and she even has some purple furniture. And she was bent over using one of my outside outlets. And she looked up and sheepishly grinned at me and she said, okay, I have a gas stove. I have a French press, but I gotta have a grind. And I said, Jody, you feel free. And so when I walked in my house, I looked at my husband and I said, hey, I just saw Jody using one of our outdoor outlets. And we both went, oh, wait a second. We can do that. We can share power. So we went around the house and we got power strips and we hooked them into our 4 outdoor outlets. My husband went out into the yard and told a couple of passersby, hey, if you want to charge, you can right over here. Please tell people. Not knowing what to expect, we did not know that dozens of people were going to be showing up on our porch. And we were so happy to be able to do that. But I have to tell you, in the beginning, I hated it. People sitting on the porch staring through my windows. I became very self-conscious of having like refrigeration. But after I got over it, I started listening. And I came to understand that people weren't charging phones. What they were really doing was connecting. And I started hearing all of these stories. And soon I started thinking, okay, I think there's like 4 categories of people that are coming onto my porch. So let me tell you the first one. The first one is the power up people. Now, these people were the action takers. I'll tell you about one of them in particular. Her name is Kelly. She happens to be right there. Her name is Kelly. Avid hiker, retired nurse, 5'3" maybe. Was super smart, and you don't want to mess with her. She would get there first thing in the morning. She would charge her phone, and she would charge her e-bike. And then she would drive around Asheville all day, and then she would come back. And she would say, okay, this is where I found a temporary cell tower. And this is where I found water. And this is where I found Wi-Fi. She was very important to the neighborhood for giving us all of that information. The next kind of person was what I called the panic person. The person who was just wild with panic. I think of Mary. Mary came onto the porch one day and she had the best idea ever. And she shared it with my porch people. And she said, okay, I am going to somehow or other get in touch with baby daddy in Charlotte. And then I'm going to get him to fill up those 5-gallon buckets that you get from Lowe's and Home Depot with gas. And drive it up here. And you can imagine what the people sitting on my porch said to her. They were like, no, that's dangerous. Well, she got fairly mad at this and stormed off. Didn't ever see her on the porch again. But I did see her driving out of the neighborhood a few days later, waving at me. So who knows? Maybe it worked. Then the third category, they were the pissed off people. They would come onto the porch and just hurl about all kinds of terrible things, about the government, about the rescuers, about FEMA, about just everything. One in particular stands out. Her name was Margie. And Margie would come onto my porch and stay long after her phone was charged. And she would sit back there and she would talk like this. And she would talk about all the things that were going wrong. And I would observe that people would come and sit down beside her, and then they would get up and they would move to the other side of the porch. And I watched that day after day until mercifully someone yelled at her, "Shut the F up." Didn't see her much after that. No. And then there were the paralyzed people. I hear a neighbor's voice one day say, "Go in there. Somebody will help." I turned around and I saw this beautiful young woman, maybe 20, 21. She was tall with long hair parted in the middle. She had a pale face and her eyes were big and frightened. She had on bell bottoms and she had on a jacket with feathers on it. And when I walked up to her and said, "How can I help you?" she looked down and whispered, "Can I charge my phone?" I said, "Sure." So she handed it to me and I went and plugged it up. Now, one of our other Power Up people had brought in a case of water in and had set it up on a table. And as I was plugging our phone in, I heard a gasp behind me and I turned and looked and she said, "You have water?" And I said, "Yes. Would you like one?" "Yes." "Great." So I handed her one. She took it, she held it to her chest and closed her eyes, but she was blessing it. Oh my gosh, I was so curious about this little baby bird that had landed on our porch. So I started asking her questions, and I soon found out that her name was Alexa. She had moved to Asheville 1 week before the storm. Oof. Guess where? From where? Bali. She didn't have any friends. She knew no one here. She didn't have any money. She did have 3 eggs and a zucchini for food. And the other thing was she had absolutely no ability to get herself out of this mess. Now the good news. There was some good news. She had a job. She told me she was an erotic internet performer. I had absolutely no idea what that was. Now my husband did. Oh, but that's a different story. Very different. I asked her the question of, "What is it that you need?" And she said, "I need to go home to my mother in New Jersey." And my heart sank. I hadn't managed to get a shower in 10 days. How was I going to get this girl to New Jersey? But then I looked around and all the porch people had been listening. And that's when my Power Up people got into action. So the first Power Up person came up to her and said, "Look, there's a neighbor who has a campfire with stew on it that he's welcoming anyone to get. Let's go get you fed." Then the second porch person, who was also a Power Up person, said, "Here's $40. Then another Power Up person sat down and said, "Okay, how are we going to get her home to her mother? She's got no business being here." So as we were sitting there talking about it, and we were discussing the fact that Asheville Airport was closed and Greenville Airport was closed, and we assumed that Charlotte was open, I got a text, and I'll never forget it because we both kind of went, because texts were very rare coming in. I had one bar. And we went, okay, we got Alexa, dial your mother. And we all sat there going, oh, please let her answer this unfamiliar telephone number. And she did. And as soon as she heard her daughter's voice, she sobbed. But then my power up person said, ma'am, I hate to interrupt you, but we have no idea how long we are going to have this. So this is what we need. We need you to immediately get an open airline ticket on American. Can you buy that now? And she said, okay, I'm getting on my computer. And we were waiting for her, hoping we would keep reception. And we did. So we got the ticket. We got off the phone with her. And then we had the next problem. How are we getting her to Charlotte? I mean, it's not like we had Wi-Fi where we go out into one of the big groups and say, hey, anybody going to Charlotte? No, we couldn't do that. So we were sitting there wondering about how we were going to do this when, like it was on cue, here comes my neighbor, Pat. And he came up to the porch to tell us he was leaving. He was going to make his way to Charlotte. And I remember turning toward him and thinking, how am I going to ask this young man to put a stranger in his car when he has no idea how long it's going to take him to get to Charlotte? But I did. And he said yes. I know. He said yes. And so then, here we were, a group of neighbors standing on our porch, watching this young girl who we had never seen before, a stranger, get into a neighbor's car and start a journey to Charlotte. We stood there for a minute, kind of speechless for a minute that this has happened. But then we all realized something even more important. Hurricane Helene may have damaged Asheville's homes and streets and mountains, but it had not taken her spirit. Our community, our porch, was proof. Thank you. Thank you.